I spend most of my money on gas.
I spend my money on school, books, and a car payment.
Well, I just got a job, so I'm going to be spending it on a new phone that I have to pay for, and going out with friends usually, and sometimes food and stuff like that.
I spend a lot of it on food and gas and clothing and a lot of things I don't need. Just stuff.
Cash flow plans do not work because you leave things out. That's why we're going to go through a whole budgeting system here, because it's a checklist of little things that sometimes will sneak up on you and you forget about. You forget about soccer pictures. You know, you forget that cars break down, car repairs. You forget about these things. And if you go through a little checklist, you'll go, oh, that. And then when you start adding it up, you get a more realistic picture. When your budget is not realistic, when it's just a wet finger in the air, then that's when you have crashes in your budget and you're going to end up with a lot more emergency budget committee meetings. Cash flow plans don't work if you overcomplicate your plan. If the nerd goes into steroid overdrive and the budget is 66 pages long and it takes a master's degree in business, an MBA, to understand your budget, no one's going to live on that in our busy culture, our go-go culture. You're not going to do that. You have to keep your life simple enough in this busy world with the budgeting so that you actually do it. That's the trick. Because that's the other reason they don't work, is people don't do a budget. You see, a budget won't work if you don't do a budget. This is not hard. And we need to do a different budget every month. We're going to start and spend this coming month's money on paper before the month begins. Every month, do a different set of forms. Forever. Now, eventually you'll get to where the kinks are worked out and it'll be pretty smooth, and most of that is repetition. But for the first few months of doing this, for the practice and to build the muscle in your character, do the details. Do lots and lots and lots of little details for those 3 months in particular while you're in Financial Peace University. So do the budget. And then a budget won't really work if you don't actually live on it. So you can do it and it's all theory and you didn't get anywhere. You actually have to live on the budget. On paper, on purpose, you write it all out, you got a game plan with your spouse, you pinky swear and spit shake, the nerd and the free spirit are together, we're walking forward, and then you just go do something that had nothing to do with what was written down. You actually have to do what you wrote down. You can't spend any money ever again except what you wrote down. And if you don't like what you wrote down, you know whose fault that is? Yours. So change it. If you want to change it, it's yours. Change it. But change it if you're married with your spouse. Because if you go home and go, honey, look what I did. That's not the rules. Okay? We're going to do this together. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove much of the management by crisis from your finances. If you're going through this class right now and you are struggling with money, things are really tight. Maybe you're even behind on some bills and you just really don't know what to do. What you've got to do first is you have to establish what we call your 4 walls around your house. You have to put up the 4 walls of your home. Take care of your own household first. Before you do anything, do food. Then do shelter. And then do utilities. And then do clothing and transportation. Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, utilities. Before you do anything. About 20-25% of people that come into our offices for counseling or meet with one of our counselors across the nation that we've trained, about 1/4 of them come in and they're current on MasterCard of the student loan and behind on their house. Is that backwards? Say yes. Yes. You're going to be behind on something. Let MasterCard squeal like a pig. All right? But be current on the house. Never get behind on your house while you pay some other goober somewhere. Never let your lights get cut off while you pay some other goober somewhere. You've got to keep this stuff in perspective and set priorities when you're in crisis. Now what Sharon and I did, and what we teach people to do is, if you're in crisis, of course you have to assess the situation. What are we going to do to earn some more income? What are we going to sell so that we can get this thing to balance? But in the meantime, we're doing a budget and we're going to spend that money on paper until the money runs out, and we draw a line where the money runs out. When the money runs out, everybody below that line that month doesn't get paid. There's not enough money. I wanted to pay them, but I didn't have the money to pay them. And I'm going to decide on purpose, on paper, before all the yelling starts, who I'm going to pay. Now, I don't like that. I want to pay them all. But I'm going to draw that line there. And we had one guy call up as a credit card collector, and he's screaming at me on the phone, calling my mother names and all this stuff, and going on with all this stuff and all these threats, and we're going to take your firstborn, and and all these things. They come up with some bizarre stuff, don't they? And I said, well, listen, man, I'd really like to pay you, but you're below the line. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, every month we do our bills, we lay everything out, and we draw a line where the money runs out, and we pay everybody above the line, and those that are below the line, we want to pay them, but we can't pay them this month, and this month you're below the line. And he said, you're kidding. I said, do I sound like I'm kidding? A little pause there. So how do I get above the line? You're nicer next time you call, you twit. But you're beginning to get the idea how this deal works, right? Manage money. When you make your money behave, it stretches, it goes further, because managed money has more muscle. It works harder. When you manage your time, you get more out of your day. It's the exact same situation. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove many of the money fights from your marriage. It'll actually cause a money fight in your marriage if you're not careful the first time you sit down. I've warned you of that already, right? So be careful, nerds and free spirits. Do this gently. It's painful, this thing called change. Okay? But long term, if you get together on where you spend your money, when you agree on your spending, you've agreed on your dreams, you've agreed on your fears, you've agreed on your goals, you've agreed on your priorities, you've agreed, you've created unity in your marriage. It's powerful stuff. It'll remove much of the guilt, shame, and fear that could be associated with buying something like food. I remember distinctly when we were broke, standing at the grocery store, writing a check, wondering if as I wrote that check, I was afraid I had just spent the money to pay the light bill with. Because we didn't have a plan. We were out of control. I'm going, and I didn't have it in my head, and I remember kind of sweating. You ever had that feeling where you kind of get a little bit of sweat on your upper lip, a little bit in your hand, when there's a little fear? Did anybody ever do that by me? Say yes? Yes. Yeah. And I remember writing that check and going, man, I had this feeling in me that, and I was really glad when I got home and we added it all up and I had the money to actually pay the electric bill and keep it on. You'll never have that feeling again when you have a written plan. Because you got the light money, and then you got the money for groceries, and everything is laid out there in order, and you know exactly what's going on. It gives you this sense of power, this sense of destiny with your money. I don't know of a single bank that will let you bounce a check and not charge you a fee. There are a lot of banks, however, that have student checking accounts, and they don't charge a monthly fee for opening those. So you can get by without being charged a monthly fee, but if you bounce checks, there's always going to be a penalty for that one. It will remove many of the overdrafts from your life, the bounced checks, the bounced debit card transactions. And that stuff, as we've already discovered, is very expensive, and it will also, of course, in the process of doing that, remove a lot of stress. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove overspending on a certain area. Just like the guy I talked about, he's overspending on restaurants, and so he didn't have the money, quote unquote, for retirement because of mismanagement. Not because he didn't make enough, but because he didn't have a plan. He didn't have it laid out. He hadn't given every dollar on paper, on purpose, a name. And if you don't tell your money what to do, as John Maxwell said, you will always wonder where it went.
Me, I probably spend on average about $75, $80 a week, if that.
I'd probably spend, let's see, probably only $30 a week.
A lot more than that.
Okay, I don't know. A lot of money because I like to shop. So it depends on whatever I shop.
I spend a good amount, probably about $30 to $40 a week, whether that's on food or CDs or going out with friends.
I'd probably have to say around $10.
The easiest and most powerful method is a zero-based plan using the envelope system. Now remember, there are no perfect months. This is going to take a while. And as you twist with this budget and you get it to working, as you find money in the budget, you put it on wherever you are on the baby step. Let's say you were on baby step 1. Baby step 1 is what? $1,000. We're going to get $1,000 for that. If we're working on that, then any money we can find in the budget, it goes straight to that. It doesn't go to pay extra on debt. It doesn't go to retirement. It doesn't go to anything until we get that $1,000 in place. So found money from the muscle of managed money, you'll dig up, you'll feel like you got a raise, you put it right on the baby step. Now the zero-based plan is where every dollar has a name before the month begins. Income minus outgo equals exactly zero. So you have to figure out what you're going to make and then spend that on paper. And we're going to do that with a form system here in a few minutes. But that's the basic idea. Every dollar has a name on paper, on purpose, before the month begins, and in agreement with your spouse if you're married. If you're single, you have somebody else look over it to make sure you know where you're going and what's going on. So here's what I want you to do. Need everybody in here to stand up. There's a great old movie with Tom Cruise in it. Some of you have seen it. It's kind of famous, called Jerry Maguire. You ever seen that movie? You remember what Jerry Maguire said? Show me the money. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? You see, what I've discovered is in America, we work hard. There are a few lazy people in America, but by and large, people work hard, don't we? And it is a shame that a high percentage of Americans work like everything throughout their entire lives and retire waiting on the government to take care of it. That's pitiful. Instead, what we're talking about tonight is, what we're talking about in this lesson is that you take the money and you make it behave. When you make the money behave, you get something for your labor. You work too hard to retire broke. You work too hard to not be able to live like no one else so that later you can live like no one else. You ought to be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. But until you manage it, until you make the money behave, you will not win. And so this whole budgeting lesson is all about you saying to yourself and to your spouse and to each other over and over and over again for the rest of your life, that's what you're going to say. But you got to mean it. You remember Jerry was about to lose a client when he was yelling it. You remember the scene? He's about to lose a client. Things were bad. And he's going, man, you got to say it with feeling, brother. That's what he was saying to him. Remember that? He said, you got to yell it. You got to say it like you mean it. You ready? Yeah. See, you work too hard to end up with nothing. Yell it again. So we could just nickname this whole lesson the Jerry Maguire lesson. Because it's a budget where the budget is where you say over and over to yourself on paper in detail, and you say it with a spiritual change, an emotional change deep down inside of you when you yell it. One more time, hard. That's how it works. Have a seat. Good job. Give yourselves a hand. About the time we went broke and started doing budgets, we started doing this thing called the envelope system. I heard about it from a Christian financial counselor at that time named Larry Burkett. And Larry was teaching a thing called the envelope system. Turns out Larry didn't invent it either. Your grandmother did. It has been around forever. And all the envelope system is this. We figured out that on some things, we get automatically drafted out of our checking account. For mutual funds or for insurance, they automatically draft us. For our utilities, they automatically draft us. We just want all of that on autopilot. That's fine. Other things, we write a check and mail the check through the mail, right? But other things, when we would go into the grocery store, or we would go out to eat, or we would go shopping for clothing, we would have a set amount, and we never knew where we stood with it. We would always be a little over or not over, and we wouldn't be in balance, and we'd come home kind of with that feeling again that maybe I just spent the money that should have been used for something else. And we discovered how to fix that. And we actually kind of discovered it while we were having a big fight about the grocery store. Because Sharon's like, you don't get enough for groceries. And I'm like, you spend too much at groceries. And you know how that works, right? And it really wasn't a pleasant conversation where we came to a mutual agreement. It was more like a knockdown drag out. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I read about this thing with Larry Burkett. We're going to try this. How much do you need for groceries in a month? And she said, Well, I could do it on $600, but if you give it to me every time, not gripe at me, I could do it on $500. And I said, well, all right, we can do that. This was a long time ago when $500 was a lot of money. And so we got an envelope out, we wrote food on the envelope. And at the first of every month, or on the 1st and the 15th, if you get paid that way, we would put $500 or $250 in cash in the envelope. And then you don't buy anything out of the food envelope except, and you don't buy any food ever except out of the food envelope. And so if you go out to eat and you forget the food envelope, you have to turn around and go back home and get the food envelope. No cheating. We did that one time. I can show you the location where we turned around in the parking lot of this place to go back home, and then surprised the babysitter, kind of scared her, and went back in and got the food envelope, and then we went out to eat. When we did that, when we went, no, we can't go write a check, or we can't hit the anytime teller, we've got to stick with our system. When we made the effort to turn around, drive back to the house 3 or 4 miles there, and surprise the babysitter, something clicked inside of us and our life started changing. Because there was a moment there where we drew a line in the sand, we said, we're not going to misbehave anymore. That's a big deal. And so we said, we're going to have the food envelope. We're buying all of our food out of the food envelope. Clothing envelope. How many of you buy clothing and then somebody at your house gripes at you about that? Hello, no, be careful. Okay? What if you had an amount in the clothing envelope that you had agreed to, and it can't be spent on anything except, then you'd never get griped at if you bought with that money, right? Because that's all it can be spent on. As long as you don't go over that amount, then there's no griping, because we all agreed on this amount in our budget. That's how it ended up in the envelope. To this day, if you talk to Sharon Ramsey and you get her to open her purse, you'll find our deluxe envelope system in her purse right now. We still do envelopes every single month. We don't do many of them. We only do 3 or 4 things with envelopes. But we still write out a check that includes the food, it includes the entertainment, it includes the clothing, and we cash those checks and we put that amount of cash in each of those envelopes with those labels on them, and it keeps us from overspending that category. Because if you look in the food envelope and there's no money in the food envelope, you don't order a pizza. You warm up leftovers. Shocking. But the kids' college fund gets funded. All right, now as we go into the forms in the workbook here, you're going to have to turn ahead of the forms, and I'm going to jump along, and you got a bunch of instruction pages and things, so we're going to hear a lot of flip, 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 flip to stay with me on this, because we're going to hit the high points, and I want to give you instructions on how to operate these forms. The first form is the major components of a healthy financial plan. The major components of a healthy financial plan. There are basically 14 major components of a healthy financial plan if you're in here. Number 1 is the written cash flow plan. We've been talking about that. Number 2 is the will or an estate plan. You need a will. 78% of the public dies without a will. That's stupid. It's stupid and it's rude. It's rude to die without a will, because the people that are left behind, you leave them in what's known as a mess. It takes years to unfold some of this garbage. Families are split apart because some bozo died without a will and didn't tell people what to do with his stuff, and they're arguing over his 2 toothpicks. So get a will, and you can get a will inexpensively today. You can go to one of these online things, and you want one that is specific to your state, because probate law is specific to your state, and then you need to learn the particular things, whether you have to have witnesses or notarization or what you have to have. But if you're broke, why do I need a will? You got kids. You don't want the state deciding anything for you. You need to take your destiny in your hands. If you don't have a lot of money, so what? For a few dollars, you can get a will and a little estate planning thing with an online service, and we strongly recommend that. Strongly recommend that. The third thing is a debt reduction plan. Begin your debt snowball. We'll talk about that in detail when we get into the debt lesson. The next one is a tax reduction plan. Vote. Next one is an emergency fund. A fully funded emergency fund is how much? No, a fully funded is how much? 3 to 6 months. And that's baby step what? Good. Very good. The next thing is a college fund. We're going to deal with that in baby step 5 and in the fruition to tuition lesson, the retirement and college planning lesson. We'll go into detail on that. Charitable giving. You must be doing some charitable giving systematically, regardless of your faith or your background or your lack of faith. Giving is a part of a healthy life. We're going to talk about that in the bonus lesson. Teaching your kids about money. You need to teach your children how to handle money. If you don't, they'll come home and live with you. Life insurance. You need good life insurance. We're going to cover in detail how to get life insurance, what kind of life insurance in the life insurance lesson. Same with health insurance, disability insurance, auto insurance, and homeowners insurance. The bottom line is this is a checklist of a good, healthy financial plan. To the extent you do not have stuff going on in those categories, you need to have stuff going on in those categories. And we're going to teach you something in every single one of those except the will. And we're not going to do estate planning in this course. But you need to get a will. I'll tell you that one more time out loud. Now the next slide is the consumer equity sheet. An accountant would call this a balance sheet. It's really simple. It's what you own minus what you owe equals the equity in that item. For instance, looking at the in red there at the top line, your house. Maybe you own a house worth $180,000 and it has a mortgage on it of $149,000. That would be equity of $31,000. And so you keep going what you own minus what you owe, and then go all the way down that list. Now, when you go down that list on that right-hand column, all the way down in the right-hand corner, the figure that is the total of your equity is your net worth. And when you get $1 million in that corner, you're a millionaire. Now, you can't just write $1 million in there. You have to really have the equity, and then you're a millionaire. But so what you own minus what you owe. Now, I'm completely debt-free, so it's just what I own all moves over to that equity column and then runs to the bottom, and we just total it up, and that gives you what's called your net worth. Now, that matters because that shows you over time how you're winning. We used to call this our hope sheet. For many years when we were fighting the bear, and it was just hand-to-hand combat, every single month we're just like barely getting by. We're knocking out a little debt, knocking out a little debt, knocking out a little debt. We didn't feel like we were getting anywhere because it was still tight. It was still a struggle. We still didn't know where we were going. But when we would add it up on the sheet, we'd go, okay, the debt's going down, the savings is going up, and that bottom number down there is going up. And we get it, even though things were tight, we still kind of felt like we were a rat in a wheel. We were getting traction and we were making progress. So we could write hope across the top of that as we saw that number go up, moving along there while we're fighting that process. Now you're beginning to build the budget when you fill out the income sources. Then all we're going to do here is figure out for this month what your income is. Joe and Susie have two salaries here. They have a $2,716 salary that comes in on the first of the month, and then another salary that comes in on $945 on the first and the 15th of the month. If you put those together, you get $3,661. So for our mythical couple here, we have $3,661 in order to spend this month. Now, that's take-home pay because that's all you've got to work with. The rest of it's theory and discussion and philosophy and all that. Doesn't matter. So just deal with take-home pay. That's your only issue. Lump sum payment planning sheet is where you keep Christmas from sneaking up on you. You keep those gotchas, those big bills that happen once a year or once a quarter or something like that from sneaking up on you. I used to pay my car insurance quarterly. Any of you pay your car insurance quarterly? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it kind of kept me off kilter all the time because I was like, free month, gotcha. Free month, gotcha. You know, and it kind of felt that way in the budget all the time. And so when I looked at this, I just went, let's just put the thing on monthly and have it auto-drafted, and I didn't worry about it anymore. But what you've got to do is you figure out what I'm going to spend. For instance, we've got on here home repairs, $1,800. We're anticipating that. Divided by 12, if I'm going to stick $150 then in the budget to accomplish that over time. If you're doing a Christmas budget, you got $1,200 for a Christmas budget, divided by 12 is $100 a month, and you put that in. And now you can't do everything and while you're in different baby steps, but as you're moving along, this makes you keep things from sneaking up on you that you know are coming. Well, really, new tires or a car breaking down aren't unexpected things. These are things you can count on. Tires wear out and cars break. So you always need to have two things going. One, you need to have an emergency fund with 3 to 6 months of expenses. And two, in your budget, be budgeting for car repairs. To not do so is pretty naive because cars break. You can count on it.